every time it shows any kind of sign of difference from the mainstream view, is sat upon as a conspiracy of left-wingers. You have, in my view, a recipe for a very, very simple-minded society.
Is our cherished liberal democracy returning to the original decadent Roman era, with a witless mob placated by bread and circuses? The great unwashed, entertained by political jesters, juggling with our future?
I sometimes characterise it as a situation now where the defining idea about making life better is currently material progress. That's associated with a sort of competitive, self-interested individualism, which produces a shallow democracy. That is where we see our duties as citizens as essentially going out and voting every few years whoever offers us the best deal. So, for example, the biggest tax cut, and that then produces this very shallow democracy which diminishes well-being.
So, as a depressed, dumbed-down electorate, we have less time and choice but to believe everything we're told. Opinion polls, like horse races, only tell us who's ahead or who's behind, yet pollies can produce poll-driven policies. And we allow vast amounts of taxpayer money to be spent on propaganda. Sorry, information.
Since 2000, the federal government has become the biggest advertiser in Australia. It's ahead of those big corporations like McDonald's, Coles, Myer and so on. We've seen the amount of money spent by governments on advertising in the 6-month period immediately before elections rocketing up in the last 10 years. So whereas Paul Keating might have spent $9 million just before a federal election in 1996, in 98, $29 million was spent by the federal government on advertising in the 6 months leading up to an election.
Millions spent on spin, slogans and slurs that bend, distort and hide truths. Manipulated media campaigns that undercut alternatives. That's what it's all about, staying in power at any cost.
He's unbelievable.
What about the workers? The workers are better off under me, mate.
He's only got one policy: spend, spend, spend.
This is pie-in-the-sky stuff.
Insurance premiums will come down by at least 12%.
It's an absolute fact children were thrown into the water.
Wearily, we now accept backflips and lies from all sides, non-core promises, economic circumstances beyond our control, even war based on intelligence at the time.
We had intelligence. Intelligence presented a strong circumstantial case.
No one apologises for stuff-ups.
This is a recession that Australia had to have.
Ministers never resign on principle anymore, while the small guy cops the blame.
One of the features of our system is that you're choosing between teams of career politicians, people who make politics their career, and who are really drawn from a very narrow sector of society. The actual membership of political parties is very narrow. Political parties are really factories for cloning candidates.
Reform the Liberal Party or keep on fighting.
Better.
That'll be right. Suburban solicitors to the right, union bullies to the left, on the road to Canberra. A town that's cloned sterility. Truly representative.
People don't participate in politics. Now, that you can say that that's the fault of the electors themselves. They should be joining parties and they should be participating. But it's a sort of vicious circle because parties are so narrowly based, people aren't interested in attempting to join them and influence them.
Australia's reputation for political apathy is well deserved. After all, we continue to live in this lucky country that's getting richer by all accounts. So why bother getting angry and voting with your feet? Just let Canberra look after our best interests.
The government has decided to commit Australian forces to action to disarm Iraq because we believe it is right, it is lawful, and it's in Australia's national interest.
Hindsight now says all wrong. But how is it that in a nation of just 20 million, a cross-country show of dissent by 1 million people can't even slow for a moment a government's march to war? Whose democracy is it?
In the end, the decision to go to war is an executive decision.
The executive earns the right to decide by a parliamentary majority. But is a mandate a blank cheque to govern?
The idea that you give a blank cheque to government, you endorse everything that a government is going to do in the next parliamentary term, greatly limits the choice of the electors. They have to choose between bundles of ideologies and policies which are sold to them, and then they're stuck with them. And the claim that now that you've elected me, I'm entitled to do whatever I like, is just anti-democratic.
If we had not fought for parity of service, parity of price...
If our governments choose to interpret and take their mandate to the extreme, then their advisers are increasingly vital to the process of government. But is our public service, whose role is to administer the government's legislation and advise without fear or favour, still able to do so as required by a healthy democracy?
My name is Michael John Scrafton and I appear as an independent citizen.
They're there to salute and do as they're told, basically, not to raise difficult problems, and certainly not to raise questions about whether the direction in which government's going is really in the public interest. So the public service has been significantly weakened, and a lot of government effort goes into concealing what goes on in the public service anyway.
Isn't it possible that if you can't recall how many telephone conversations that you had, that you may not be able to recall very clearly a lot of other events that happened?
I suppose the answer to that, Senator, is that I don't know if you've ever been in the position of having to explain to a Prime Minister that the position he's been taking for a month is wrong.
And it's not just individuals who are blackballed. Whole organisations can suffer similar vilification.
The famous Brazilian bishop once said, when I feed the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why the poor have no food, they call me a communist. And more charities and non-government organisations in Australia are quite legitimately asking why the poor have no food, why the environment is being despoiled by rapacious business, and why the human rights of asylum seekers are being so severely eroded. And those organisations are being persecuted by the government. You know, I heard one senior executive, the chief executive of a major charitable organisation in Australia, who came out and opposed the government on a particular issue. The government minders went around the press gallery in Parliament House and spread malicious rumours about this man's sexual peccadilloes. Completely unfounded, completely untrue, but it's a systematic attempt